Hi, welcome to In a Pickle Knitting. My name is Donna, and today In a Pickle Knitting is more about sewing, and I get myself in a pickle with sewing just like I do with knitting. I would like to provide today a tutorial for creating a 3-zipper project bag similar to this one. So there is a zipper up front that has a little pocket. There is the top zipper that opens the bag, and it's extended zipper so that it provides full access to the inside of the bag. And there's a third pocket zipper inside the bag. So this is my 3-zipper project bag. This project bag does not need to be made in the size that I have made. I will be providing the measurements for this size bag. It is a box bottom bag that will sit up on its own. I've had it folded, so I'd have to stuff it down to make it stand up again. It does have a detachable handle. But the same bag can be made without the zipper on the front and just putting a patch pocket inside or no pocket inside. And this one is smaller. You can see a little bit smaller, so you can bring the measurements down. You can also bring the measurements up. I took the zipper pocket off the front and made 2 patch pockets on the front of this bag. On the inside, just a patch pocket. So again, it's made exactly the same way, but this one is quite a bit larger. So you don't have to use the size that I'm using today. You can change the measurements, but this is the one that if you follow along with me, we will be making a bag that should come out approximately this size. And this would be a good sock project bag. If you're a knitter, you can fit 2 balled up cakes of yarn in the bottom of it. So some 2 skein projects will work in this, but it doesn't then have a whole lot of room for a large project. What this tutorial is, I'm going to take you step by step through the process of creating a bag. And if you follow along step by step, you will have a finished project bag at the end. What the tutorial is not, is teaching you how to sew, how to cut fabric, how to operate your machine. I have a 28-year-old Elna 7000 that has serviced me really well, but it's the only machine that I know the settings on that I use. Your settings would be different than mine, so I cannot help you with what settings to use on your particular machine, how to thread it, any of that. I'm just giving you step-by-step process of creating the bag, and I am assuming that you have basic sewing machine skills, and that you also know how to operate your own machine. So I apologize for not being able to help with those sorts of questions, but it's outside the scope of what my knowledge base. I am not an expert sewer. I have just been sewing for 48 years, and I have sewn a lot in those 48 years and many, many different kinds of things. Making project bags started off with me just trying to fashion different useful bags for my knitting, and I had lots and lots of fabric, so I went from there, and I've made so many failure bags. This one works for me. There might be better ways to do different procedures that I show you here. If you know a better way, use your better way. This is just how I do it, and it works for me this way. I do change the way I do things. If I learn a new way to do something, a way that might work better, I do it. So again, if you have a better way, absolutely use it. You don't want to use something that's not going to work for you as well. And certain things work better for different people. One thing that's easy for me might be difficult for you, and vice versa. So this tutorial just has that setting, that scope for it. A way to plan your bag would be to watch the video first 2 segments. Well, this welcome, and then the next segment is going to talk about the supplies and materials that you will need. And then the next segment takes you through the actual measurements of the pieces, which will guide you in how much fabric you need. I can't tell you how much fabric that you absolutely need to have, because if you have a directional print, you may need more fabric in order to lay it out correctly. You might use scraps of things. You can mix and match here. There's places where, you know, you can use different fabrics for lining the pockets. So I can't give you a definitive by this much yardage. Instead, I have given you all the measurements, and then you can sit with fabric that you have and decide if you have enough for that. So I would watch those two parts and then make a decision on how you're going to do it, and get all of your materials together, do your cutting, and then watch through the rest of it step by step to get an idea of where we're going, and then start the process. That's a good way of learning, is you know what you're going for. So this is the whole thing. Then look at the parts, which is where I'm showing you what pieces to cut, and then go through what you're going to do before you actually start. That said, I usually just jump into projects too. I'll pay attention to so much and then just jump in. The reason you might not want to on this one is you may see that later you don't want to do something the way I did it. And if you've watched the whole thing, you can make that mental note or write it down. No, I'm going to do this first. Certain steps in this process can be done in different orders. This is just the order I usually do my bag in. So anyway, let me make sure that there's, modifications. Feel free to modify anything, change sizes for the kind of project bag that you want to have. And I think that's about it. So following this will be what materials and supplies you need, and then the fabric. So if you're interested in making this 3-zipper bag, that's where to get started. Okay, see you next time. Let's talk about some of the supplies and the equipment or materials that you will need in order to create your 3-zipper bag. Well, the first thing you're going to need are 3 zippers. And you will want to choose some that you think are a nice contrast or coordinates to the fabrics that you've chosen. In this particular case, I'm going to use white zippers on the outside and top of the bag, and this peach colored one for the inside pocket. I have purchased my zippers from 2 different companies, and one is thicker, wider than the other. And I actually find that I like that, because I would like the one that's slightly larger to be my top zipper, and the one that's a little bit smaller to be that second zipper on the front of the bag. And then for the inside of the bag, using a regular small zipper is fine. I like to use these handbag zippers, and the 14-inch length will work great for this bag. Will also work great for a little bit larger bag if you decide to make yours larger. If you go too much bigger, you need to go up to the 16-inch. The inside zipper does not need to be this long. I always buy rather a long zipper and for those type applications, because you can always cut it off. But you could start with a 12-inch and you'll have enough to cut off on that. This one I think is another 14-inch zipper, so we'll be cutting a lot of that off, but it really doesn't matter. You will need a thread and a fully wound bobbin. Perhaps you'll need 2 different colors of thread depending on your bag. If you have different color for the lining, you may want to be using white thread on your lining like I'm going to be doing, and then the outside of the bag. If white didn't work, choose another color. So you may need more than one color of thread, but definitely a fully wound bobbin of each color. Another thing that makes one of our zipper applications slightly easier is some washi tape that is 3/8 of an inch wide. If you had a masking tape, that would substitute well. The washi tape tends to peel up very easily. I measured this. This is the size opening I want to make, and this is just, it helps us with that application. So if you have some washi tape, that would be handy. One of the main products that will make this bag easier to sew for people who have less experience installing zippers is to use a wash away tape. This is called Wonder Tape. It's made by Dritz. You can purchase this at most fabric stores. I know Joann's carries it. I have not found it at Michael's. If you're in the US, those are 2 of the big box places that you might be able to find fabric notions and other supplies. This is, as I said, I found it at Joann's. I have purchased it there before, but I cannot find it at Michael's. So if you have your choices, pick one or the other. I also shop at a quilting shop, and they sell a different brand. It's this right here. But the product works exactly the same. So what this is a wash away tape that is two-sided, and it allows us to attach our zippers with the tape and keep them in place, helping you get a straight zipper application. Makes it quite a bit easier. So if you can you won't use an entire tape, spool of the tape. This is getting lower in quantity, and I've probably used it on several bags. I don't always use it, but we're going to use it on this bag for sure. The next thing that you're going to need is a D-ring. We're going to use this to put on the side of our bag to attach our lobster clasp to the handle. So you'll need this lobster clasp D-ring combination for the handle. Now, some people like to embellish their bags. There are ways to apply little crystals with a special kind of glue. If you're planning something that your fabric will look good with that, make sure you have that on hand and know how to do that application. We might want to attach a progress keeper as a zipper pull. So if you're planning something like that on your bag, or maybe you want to attach ribbon to your zipper pull at the end to help pull the zipper along, you'll want to have that. But any kind of embellishments, we have little tags that can be sewn on. There are wooden ones and metal ones and fabric ones and ultra suede ones. I have a little tag that I use on my handle, so I'll need that handy. So these are some of the supplies to make the bag, but then you will also need to have some equipment that to help with your sewing. You will be cutting fabric and interfacing out in order to make your bag, and so some type of cutting instruments are necessary. You can use scissors to cut out, and most people who are sewing need a smaller pair of scissors in order to snip their ends as they're sewing. A rotary cutter is very helpful, along with a ruler and a cutting board. I didn't bring my cutting board over, but I use the ruler and cutting board and a rotary cutter to cut my pattern pieces out. They are all squares or rectangles, and so it's pretty easy to use those. But if you don't have those or don't choose to use them, scissors will work. If you want to, you can use freezer paper or something like that to actually make pattern pieces. Totally up to you and your comfort level. Another piece of equipment that I use when making my bags is this little tool right here. It's called an OmniGrid. It's a little 2-inch cutter. It has measurements on it. It helps me cut out my corners when we go to box our corners. So if you have a tool like that, that might be handy. Absolutely not necessary. You can certainly use a ruler to draw lines on and do your cutting. I don't know about you in sewing, but a seam ripper and I are never far apart. Can't tell you how often I use a seam ripper. You're also going to need some sewing pins. And you do not need for sure, but some people like to use the little clips. You use the clips in place of the pins, but there are a few times in this bag that we need to use pins as well. So if you just have pins, that'll work just fine. But the clips are handy, they come out pretty quickly. Another little tool that I find very handy is this little point turner. It helps you to poke out the little corners, and there's a couple places that we use this. Absolutely not necessary, but you'll need something to help you poke out those corners. It is very helpful also to have a washable marker. I use the fine point on this. It will help us at least with one of our zipper applications. This one here is a Dritz product. It can be found at quilting shops. I found this one at Joann's. I just wanted to have a package to show you. This one's purple, and it also comes off with the air, I believe. You don't actually have to use cold water, but the blue one you'll use cold water to remove the marks. But there's things where you want to know when it's time to stop. So you're also going to need an iron and a pressing surface, your ironing board or some type of pressing board. But I also suggest having a pressing cloth. You can buy cheesecloth. What I use is actually a little bit thicker, more gauzy. This is a dish towel. It's quite large. I have 2 of them, and I've used them for years when ironing. It has a bird design on it. It was given to me as a dish towel, but it has huge surface that I can put over things when I'm ironing, and this will be helpful in our handbag. And I did mention if you're going to do rotary cutting that you will need your cutting board. So those are some of the supplies and materials that we'll need to get started with our bag. I neglected to mention something fairly important and fairly basic to this project, but you will need a sewing machine. And I suggest putting a new needle in. You can use a 14. This is usually a pretty good size because we're going through several layers. But if you happen to be baking your bag with a thicker fabric, the 16 or the denim, or this says jeans, but the denim type needle will puncture through more layers. At some point you're going to be having 2 layers of your fabric and that fiber fill. So if you've got a thicker fabric, maybe the 16 and others, the 14. You can go smaller, particularly when we don't need to go through several layers, but it might be good to have the 14 on hand for when we have to go through more layers. Okay, that's it then. We're going to talk now about the fabric and that we're going to be using for our bag and what we need to cut in the way of fabric and interfacings and lining, etc. So start with your main fabric. This is going to be the back of our bag. You need to cut 1 piece of for your back. It will be 12 inches wide by 7 inches tall. And the directionality matters only if you have a directional print. So this is sitting the way it will sit on the back of the bag. And this is presuming that you're making it exactly like what the bag that I'm showing you. You can change these measurements to make a different size bag. The next fabric piece that you're going to cut from your main fabric is going to be in the front of the bag. It's going to go in between the top little piece and the center section of the bag. On either side we have to have a little extra fabric to hold our zipper in place. So you'll need to cut 1 of these from your main fabric. It's 2 inches by 10 inches, and this can vary. I actually cut this piece larger and we cut part of it off. So if you'd like to wait and hold this as your last piece that you cut, once I show you how to put the bag together, if you're running short on fabric, there are different ways you could cut this particular piece. So that's just if you're short on fabric, you might want to wait. The next piece you're going to cut, we are going to be folding it and pressing it and using it in a folded state. This is the top front of our bag, and you'll need to cut 1 of these from your main fabric, 12 inches wide by 4 inches tall. And again, you'll notice that we are going to be folding it. This piece is going to be used in this direction. The top will be the raw edge and the bottom will be your folded edge. That may make a difference for the way you're cutting it. If it's wrong, usually you can flip it over and it'll be right. Our next piece is the center section of the front of the bag, and you're going to cut 1 piece of this. It will be 12 inches wide by 9 inches tall. And again, this piece we're using folded. So there's our 9 inches tall, and we're going to be folding it and pressing it. And this piece, the top is going to be the folded edge, whereas the last piece, the bottom was the folded edge. Okay, so this is for the front of our bag. We now need to go to what we're going to cut out of a contrast fabric. Now on this particular bag that I'm going to be using as a demonstration bag, I am using the same fabric for my contrast as for my lining. And that's not usually the case, but in this particular case, this is a light color and will be good for the lining. I had enough of that fabric, so I decided to just use this for the inside of the bag rather than white on this particular bag. You're going to need to cut 2. One is the front, one is the back of the bag. It's the bottom of the bag and the actual bottom that it sits on, and a little bit up the sides. Some people might like this piece to be taller on the bag, in which case you can extend this 4.5 inches. I've done them 5.5. I've done them 6 at the bottom on this particular bag. If you do that, be sure to add however much you add to this 4.5 inches, add to your lining length as well, or height. Okay, so 2 of those. Now, I'm showing this part because you might need to do the same thing. I have cut 2 more pieces of fabric out of, it's a lining fabric. I am going to be interfacing this fabric, but it is a very thin fabric, and it's the bottom of my bag. I want to give it a little extra support, so I'm going to be sewing these pieces together, and they're going to be interfaced. So if you have a really thin fabric, you may want to do something like that as well. The next piece out of contrast is you're going to cut a piece that's you're going to cut one that is 18 inches long and 3.5 inches wide. And we're going to be taking this piece and folding it, and I'll be showing you this later, and ironing it. But after it's been ironed, we are going to be cutting 3 inches off the end. So we'll end up with a 15-inch long piece. This is for the handle, and this is to attach the D-ring to hold our handle in place. If you want your handle to be a little bit longer, if you think you want more room or need more room for your hand to get through the handle, you would want to increase this 18 inches. So just think about that. When I finish the bag, if you like that handle length, this is the size you want. But if you think you want it a little bit bigger, you can always make that piece 19 inches or 20 inches, whatever suits your needs. So you will need one of this out of our contrast fabric. Additionally, out of our contrast fabric, we need to cut a small piece that is 3 inches by 6 inches. And this is going to be put at the end of our zipper that goes on the top of the bag. And we're going to make a little pocket for the end of the zippers, because zipper tab for the top zipper. So you'll need one of this. Okay, now we're going to go on to lining fabric. So whatever you selected to line your bag. As I said, I'm using the same fabric to line my bag as is my contrast fabric. And you will need to cut 2 pieces of your lining, 12 inches wide by 10 inches tall. If you've added any length to the bag or height at the bag at any point, be sure and increase that 10 inches the same amount you increase the other pieces. So you need 2 of these. Okay, there we go. So that's our bag lining. And next we are going to have 2 pockets that require lining. We have a pocket that's going to go on the front that needs to have a backing to it, and this needs to be 12 inches by 7 inches. And then we have an inside pocket where we need to cut a piece that is 9 inches wide by 14 inches long. If you have made your bag any taller and you'd like a slightly deeper pocket, you would be adding your to this measurement here. You could make a 16 inches long if you've added an inch to your bag. This piece is going to be folded, so your pocket zipper is going to be going across right about here. So that shows you about how deep your pocket is. You just don't want this to be too long because it gets into the bottom of the bag and might be harder to get things out of the pocket. So this fabric does not need to be white, but you do need to think about the color of your bag. You'll notice my fabric is very light, so I thought white would work well for those pockets. I won't have anything showing through. If your fabric is too dark with a lighter fabric for these pockets, you're going to have to do something to prevent that color showing through. We're going to have a few things that keep the color from showing through, but lighter in the pockets is a good idea. Now let's get into the different interfacings that we're going to be using. Brand-wise, I just happen to use these particular ones. If you have others that are good replacements, it doesn't matter. This is a Pellon SF101. It's called Shapeflex Interfacing. It's for lightweight to midweight fabrics. It is a fusible stabilizer. It is woven. I do suggest for this that you use lightweight in most cases. If you've got a very light fabric, you can try midweight, but I'm not giving any instructions there because I haven't used it. I do prefer the woven This is a package I keep on hand as my emergency. I typically do not buy it this way. I buy it on a bolt by the yard, which you can get this at Joann Fabrics or probably any fabric store, probably Amazon as well. We're going to use a second stabilizer, and I don't think that's focusing there. This is called Craft Fuse. It's by Pellin, and it's number 808. It is a non-woven interfacing. It's fairly stiff. I'll show you a piece here. This is just a cut piece, and if I can get the light on there, you might see it's got little, there, I got a little bit of light reflecting. You can see that's the glue that adheres it to your fabric. So this is non-woven. It's fairly stiff, and we're not going to use very much of it. So if you don't already have it, you can buy it by the yard at fabric stores. I think sometimes you can find it in packages like this, but I was not able to find it that way the last time I was shopping. This we're not going to use very much of. So what I'm trying to say is there are ways you maybe can get around it. You could use something different. Maybe you can double the amount of this interfacing, because we're not going to cut very much of this, as I'm going to show you in just a second. So we'll think about some ways maybe we can work around that. The first piece you want to cut out of what I'm calling the craft non-woven, so a craft weight, is we're going to cut a little piece that's 3/4 of an inch wide by 3 inches long. And this is just going to keep we're going to put it in that piece that holds the D-ring onto the bag, because I found if you don't have enough structure there, that little thing kind of flops over, especially with the handle on it. So we're just doing this to add some weight. Oops. And the next piece we're going to cut from that is a piece that's 2 by 5. And I will tell, there is a third place you may wish to use this type of interfacing. So there's an option here, and that is on this piece. Now I'm saying to cut one piece 3/4 of an inch wide by 15 inches long out of the lightweight. You could use that craft weight non-woven. This is going to be in our handle. Some people might like their handle to be a little bit stiffer. It's going to be 4 layers of fabric folded over and this lightweight interfacing, and it makes a handle that you can kind of squeeze it together. So it just depends how you'd like your handle to be. So this will be our first piece of lightweight interfacing that we're going to cut. Our next piece we're going to cut from the lightweight Fusible is going to be 12 by 7 inches. This is going to go on the back of our bag to stabilize the fabric on the back of the bag. So we cut a piece of fabric this same size. We want a piece of interfacing to fit it. And a piece, also cut one that's 12 by 4.5 inches. This is going to go in the middle part of our bag. That's a folded over piece. We're just going to interface 1/2 of that. And we're going to do the same thing with that top folded piece. So we need to cut a piece that's 12 by 2 out of the lightweight again. We need to stabilize the bottom part of our bag in the contrast fabric. So we're going to cut 2 pieces that are 12 by 4.5 inches out of the lightweight woven. Okay, now we're going to move on to our fiber fill. We're going to add fiber fill, the fusible type. So this has a fusible backing here. We're going to cut 2 pieces of this, 1 for each side of the lining, 12 inches by 10 inches. We're going to cut a little bit on this. I will tell you, when you're cutting this for your fabric, you can go a scant 12 by 10. So it can be 11 3/4, 11 1/2. Instead of 12, it can be 9 3/4, 9 1/2 instead of 10, because it doesn't matter if it comes in just a tiny bit to do some layering of the bulk of our seams. And the last thing that you need is a scrap of that same fiber fill. And I said approximately 2 by 2. We are going to be cutting it down. This is the piece that will actually fit on my bag, which I think is 1 1/2 by 1 1/4. It's just a little scrap, but I said just cut a piece this size. We figure out what size to make this more precisely when we measure it up against your zipper. because your zipper, these zippers that you put in the bags come in different widths, or just different brands have a different width. So if you just have a scrap, so that's what you're going to cut. Those are the things that we need to cut. So next, let's look at, I don't know next, but I'll put something's coming up next. We're going to get started with some prep work on the bag. This bag is a lot of prep work, and I feel like proportionately less actual sewing time. So if you get everything prepared ahead of time, everything then moves smoothly once you're at the sewing machine. And two things I had forgotten to mention in the introduction. The first is that you may notice different lighting situations, perhaps different wardrobe that I have on, because I'm filming this out of sequence and I'm filming it just when I get a chance. It's taken more than one day, so be prepared that you'll see different things. And then if I have to re-record things, so that gets out of sequence too. And another thing that I didn't mention is that this bag can often, but not always, be made using 3 fat quarters. And fat quarters are a way of cutting a yard of fabric that gives you a little bit more useful piece. Quilters use them all the time. Many quilt shops sell their fabric in by yardage or by the fat quarter, because you don't often need a whole lot of fabric, but a quarter yard of fabric taken just off the bolt, 44 inches or so wide, and that you just get a little strip there of 9 inches, and that might not be as big, whereas the fat quarter, they take the yard and divide it this way, so you get a wider, more of almost a square. So those fat quarters, I find I've made many bags using just 3 fat quarters, but you run into trouble with the directional prints on those, so be careful. And we're going to get started with our prep work, and what I do first is go to the ironing board, which is where I am now, and apply my interfacings to my pieces. So I am going to adjust the camera and hopefully just get the ironing board surface so that you can watch what I'm doing. Once you've seen what I'm going to do, you can fast forward through lots of this, or totally skip the rest of this segment once you see, what's being done. And I will probably, depending on how it looks, I will probably speed some of the parts up too, so that you don't have to, actually spend the entire amount of time it takes to make the bag watching the video. So we're going to change now to the ironing board view. So I will use the bag to show you which pieces we are prepping, so that you have a little frame of reference. Do note that while this main fabric is the same on the model bag and the one that I'm going to be demonstrating on, my contrast fabric is different, my lining fabric is different, and my pocket linings are different, but it in no way affects what we're doing, just that matching colors is slightly different. I'm going to start by prepping this piece that goes across the back, and this was your piece that was 12 by 7. So you want your fabric piece, and I normally press it and turn it to the wrong side, and then you need your piece of interfacing that your fusible lightweight woven interfacing that you've already cut to the same size. Put it down with this rough side, which is the adhesive, down, and follow your manufacturer's directions for ironing the 2 pieces together. So once that is applied, you can set this piece aside. Then the next piece that we will prepare is for this little part right here that goes above the front zipper. This piece was 12 by 4 inches. And what you'll want to do is have it, when it's open, you want to match the raw edges and press it. And then you're going to open it back up. Now, here's where it matters. This folded edge faces the bottom of the bag, and the raw edge is the top. And that is because on this zipper application here, this is the folded edge, so it gives us a nice edge. The raw edge is going to be turned under here in a seam allowance when we apply this zipper. So if you have a print that has a right upside down and right side up, you want to make sure that it's sitting right side up with the fold at the bottom. On my print, either way is about the same. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to take that piece of interfacing that I cut half the width of this, so this is a 12 by 2 inch piece, and get it down right into that fold, a nice, push it right up there, and again, adhere your interfacing to this piece and set it aside. The next piece that we will prepare is this section right here, and we're going to have the opposite situation. This is the fold and the raw edges down here that will be, this is the fold, the raw edges down here in a seam that we'll be creating. So we're going to take that 12 by 9 inch piece and fold it, and you will again make sure that the folded edge is your top. So if this print makes a difference, mine doesn't. So it won't matter to me. It doesn't matter on a lot of prints. We're going to do the same thing with that piece of interfacing that we cut 12 inches by 4.5. Put it in between the fold and follow your manufacturer's instructions for adhering that interfacing. And set that piece aside. So we have prepared the top of our bag on the front and the top of our bag on the bottom. And now we have the bottom part of the bag, which is a contrast fabric. I did not mention that it is perfectly fine to not use a contrast. This bag is just all one fabric, so you would just be cutting larger pieces. You would adjust and subtract out the seam allowance there. And if I wanted, this is a larger bag, if I want it longer, I can make a deeper pocket. So again, you do not have to do contrast. We are on this bag so that if you want a contrast, you'll know what to do. So we are going to work on these two pieces. There's a front contrast and a back contrast. You cut two pieces that were 12 by, I think, 4.5, 12 by 4.5. And we want to apply the interfacing to the back sides of both of those pieces of fabric. So go ahead and do that. All right, these two pieces are prepared, but you may remember me saying that this fabric is very thin, and so I've got this lining piece that I cut the same size. I'm going to sit these together. I'm going to do a stitch around the outside to put that together, and I will do that later, but I'm going to go ahead and put them together. If they need any ironing, press them so that they're nice and smooth. When you're sewing, you can sew without a sewing machine if you use a needle and thread, but I can't sew without using an iron because you need to get things smooth. So that's our first contrast piece, which is the bottom of the bag. Now we're also going to be using contrast for this little tab that holds our D-ring and for our handle. So you had a long piece, 18 inches by 3.5 inches, and I've already pressed mine, but let me just I'll just open it up. In order to get started, your pieces will be still in one piece. I've already separated mine. You want to first fold this in half and press it, and then open this piece up and fold one raw edge in towards that line that you made with pressing, and press it down. You can just do that lightly to keep it in place, and then fold the other raw edge up towards the center and give that a nice good press and close them up, and they should meet at the edges, and you have a nice folded edge now that's not raw. This is fairly flimsy, especially on this particular light fabric, and so you'll remember that we cut a piece of our woven interfacing to fit inside here. This is the 3/4 of an inch by 15 inches long piece, and at this point I like to take my scissors and trim off just the tiniest bit because we're going to be sewing it together at the ends there, and a little bit less bulk is handy. You don't have to do that, but I'm going to cut off just a little bit at each end. I actually like sewing with the interfacing on there. It makes the fabric sew better, but I want a little less bulk. So I'm just going to leave a little seam allowance at either end, and I'm going to fold it back up and adhere that interfacing. So now I have a little sturdier, not greatly so, but a little bit more body to this handle. Remember, this is the place you could use the craft fuse instead if you would like your handle to have a little bit more body than this one is going to have. And you can kind of get an idea right here. I don't know if maybe you can. It works fine for me. And I'm sorry, I didn't say, go ahead and cut 3 inches off before you do this. And now let's take that 3-inch piece, and you will remember we cut a piece of craft fuse that same length. Mine came out a little longer. Snip that off. And we're going to open this up and adhere the craft fuse inside. In this case, it doesn't matter if it's at the ends, because we're just going to be putting a D-ring on here. We're going to sew it first, but we're going to put a D-ring on there and stitch it into the bag along here. So that's the prep work for our handle and our D-ring holder. And next you had a 3 by 6 inch piece of fabric that is going to be the zipper tab on the main part of our bag. So this piece you want to fold in half and put a little crease there. Just press it in. Open it back up, and we are going to fold down towards the middle line, but decide how deep you'd like that little pocket to be. I don't go all the way, about like that. And before I press it, I fold it up and make sure that I have made it the same height. Give that a zap of the iron, and then open it back up like this, and we are going to fold over both sides. Good idea now is to grab your zipper. So I'd like to show you why I can't give you an exact measurement, and that is that this particular zipper is wider at the base very slightly than this particular zipper. So if you'll just get your zipper at this point to decide how far in we're going to turn this fabric. Don't make it super tight because you won't be able to get the zipper in, but give yourself just a tiny bit on either side. I do a little finger press like that, and then that tells me where I want to make my crease. Double check your zipper is going to go in there. I have more than enough room. I could even make that tighter, but I don't mind it being wider than the zipper by a little bit. The next thing that you want to do is on one of the ends, you want to trim away using a little triangle some of that bulk. This is the back side of the zipper. And then let's fold it in half this way. And we have made what's going to be sewn on to the end of our zipper, but I like to put a little bit of fiber fill in there. So we had cut the scrap, the 2x2 scrap. If you will take that now and cut a piece that will fit in like this. You see I've got a tiny bit of space on all the sides there. And after you want to put this in the front part. So I like to open it up and put it, you can put it right inside that little pocket. And follow your manufacturer's directions, and that will give us a little bit of padding in there, which is, I don't know, I think it just makes this nicer when you sew it up. So if you don't want to put the fiber fill, it probably worked just fine. Okay, so that's our next prepared piece, and you can go ahead and leave it with your zipper because we're going to be attaching it when we start to sew. The next piece that we want to look at is a piece that you cut from your main fabric, and you cut it 2 inches by 10 inches. This was the piece I told you you could wait till the end and cut it out of scrap. I want to show you how, there it is, how we're going to prepare this, and then you can decide if it doesn't fit your pieces, you can cut this differently. You want that piece of craft fuse, the interfacing that is fusible, and it was 2x5. We're going to put it in the middle of the back side of the 2x10 piece, and then fold each edge in towards the center and adhere that interfacing. So now I've made this. I'm going to cut down the middle. So now I've got two little pieces with a folded edge here, some interfacing in there, and these are going to be this right here at the end of each zipper on the front. Now you'll say, well, that's a huge piece, and why did I need it that big? You don't need it that big. It's just easier to hold on to it and apply it to the zipper if it's a little bit larger, and then we cut it down later. This piece of fabric could have been instead a piece that was like this, and you put your interfacing here and fold it over and cut it in half this way. That's why I'm saying different size pieces will work. This can be a little bit smaller if that's what you've got. Okay, so those are pieces that need to be prepared in advance. And then we have our lining. We also have a piece of fiber fill cut to fit the lining. Now, I don't want to adhere one of them now. I'm going to adhere it to the fabric, but I don't want to do it until after my zipper application. So with one piece of your lining, just press it, have it with the rest of your pieces, and that one piece of your fiber fill ready to go. At the top of your fiber fill, I want you to cut, I'm going to lay it on the front here so you can see, I want you to cut a little notch out, and this is going to be the top of the bag. This notch is just to prevent too much bulk in this part of the bag when we are trying to sew things together around the edge. We're taking away some fiber fill from this area because it's very, very thick there. And just reducing that fiber fill will help us with the sewing, and it doesn't impact the bag in any way. So you want to apply this with the bumpy side to the wrong side of your fabric. I've already done this one. So it's adhered up here, and I've got my little notches, and I just remember that's the top of my bag. So that piece will be adhered. That's one piece of our lining, but the other piece we will wait and put it together at the end of our sewing. Now, inside of the pockets, you need a piece of fabric here so that you're not looking at the back of the fiber fill. And this internal pocket, we actually have to make a pocket. So you have two pocket lining pieces. So our pocket lining, we're just going to press the piece that's 12 by 7. So our pocket lining piece that is 12 by 7 just needs to be pressed. However, if you have a bag where you are concerned that this color is going to show through, I'm using white so it's not going to show through, but if you had a darker color than your main color, which I don't recommend just because it helps to have pockets be somewhat light in color, but if you did, you may want to cut a piece of that woven interfacing to go ahead and adhere to the wrong side of the fabric. That'll make it a little bit thicker and perhaps it won't show through. You have a second piece of pocket lining fabric that was 9 inches by 14, I believe, and you want to press it, but then we are going to be folding it in half. And when you fold it in half, you would like to have the right sides together. Our zipper is going to go in here, so when we open the zipper and look inside, we want to see the right side of the fabric. So go ahead and just press that in half, right sides together. I believe now we have prepared everything for starting some sewing. You will want to gather the D-ring and your toggle hook to make the handle. If you had a little tag for that, as I do as well, you'll need. You want your long zipper that's going to go on the top of the bag, and you want your long zipper that's going to go across the front of the bag. So if you'll have those, that'll be our next sequence of steps to take.